Oh. Hello everyone, I'm Shruti Kotlil and here is Sudha Kotlil and we are part of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We manage the partnerships and fundraising and also lead a few projects. And today we are here to talk to you about one of the important themes of this COP, that's COP16 in Cali, Colombia, which is themed as peace with nature. And as Gibbon, we've been working in this space of peace, environment, and conflict over the past 2 years, and during this capacity building training we'll be talking to you a bit about it and what we have been doing and giving you a brief background and overview around this very important topic and what are our plans for COP16. So I'll start and then Sudha will follow up with few other information. So as given how it started and why did this conversation start for us as a youth community. So we, as you all know by now, Gibbon holds consultations with the global community, both online as well as in person. And during such consultations over the past few years, a constant recurring theme that came up within our youth community is a need to develop skills and also to be able to navigate this important space of conflict that the youth face in various forms and during the work that they do. So not just the given work, but also even professionally, they come across a lot of conflict and tense situations that they wanted help and skills to be able to navigate. So as we were mapping the gaps that exist in our capacity building sessions as well as trainings, one thing that constantly came out was to be able to navigate the space of interacting with different actors, different stakeholders, and how best to deal with these kinds of relationships and how best to find interventions or solutions that take into account a lot of these different stakeholders. So during this mapping process is when we understood that there was a very important gap or a very significant gap in terms of being able to deal with these kind of situations, and that the youth really needed some kind of skill set or some kind of uh, skills, yes, some kind of skills to able to navigate it or address it in a more holistic manner. And that's when we partnered with a foundation called Peace Nexus. And ever since then, in 2021, we have been working with them in order to bring this very important conversation into the forefront and also building the capacity of youth in this regard. Yeah, so just to give you an outline and a time map of how it started. So in 2021 is when we had the initial conversations with Peace Nexus. So they gave us a presentation to a small team, a small core team of Gibbon, to talk us through because it was very new for us as well, and we had never come across uh, such situations or such topics that were discussed in the biodiversity space before. So we were one of the first organizations or networks to bring this kind of a conversation and try find solutions and ways to tackle it the best way possible. So they started off with Peace Nexus giving us a small introduction, a small overview, or a session with us over two sessions, and giving us a background and an understanding of what is peace, what is violence, and what is conflict, and how it affects various different stakeholders, and how it can affect youth, and what are the solutions or what are the challenges that they have faced working with different stakeholders, and what are the solutions they had for us as a youth community to be able to navigate it. So it was really important for us to have that discussion with them because they were the experts in the field and we were new. And since then, we have learned quite a lot from them. So as you can see, we had the presentation by the small team, and that sort of immediately led to COP15, and we had a small consultation, which Sudha will talk more about. So I'm just giving you the timeline or the overview here. And then we had COP15, where we did a lot of other different activities around this theme, which Sudha will again go into more details. So in 2023, then we developed a roadmap with Peace Nexus. We identified a lot of different avenues, and all of this was through consultation with our youth community. And we set up a working group, which is now very active. And we have very exciting plans for COP16 as well, which is spearheaded through this working group. Yeah, and now we are in 2024, close towards the end of 2024, and yeah, we've been working with a dedicated team, and now all of our eyes are on COP16 that's happening this month. Yeah. So maybe with that brief overview and brief context about why we wanted to start this discussion and why we wanted to have this conversation, I now move on to setting the stage for you. So uh, this first thing, maybe to for us all to be on the same page and to understand this topic even better, because for a lot of us it's new, as I said before, it's new, and therefore it's important that when we use all of these terms, different terms in this space, we are aware of what we are talking about and what what it means, and that's so that all of us have a same understanding or grasp of the context. So, what is conflict? So, I think since this is a recorded session, I would have loved to hear your inputs on this and to get your idea of what conflict means. But since it's already recorded, I think I'll just tell you what it actually means. And this all of this has been through inputs from Peace Nexus. So we've had their support to put together this presentation, and a parts of this is what they had given us as well. So conflict is actually doesn't always have to be negative. So conflict always, when we speak about it, it's always in a negative connotation, but it doesn't have to be. It is usually a result of two or more parties or groups or individuals having a differing opinion, interests, or ideas. So that's when conflict arises. It's usually differences of agreement that causes conflicts to arise, and they arise because of imbalances in human relationships, and it can also be because of the circumstances that you're born into or circumstances that shape you, social, like the social status, access to resources, power, discrimination, poverty, oppression, and even environmental degradation. And this is very important because we don't usually consider environment and biodiversity as being one of the causes for conflict or one of the reasons for conflict, but it definitely is as we look at the different interlinkages and different scenarios that, as you have been doing over the past four capacity building sessions. So, as I said, conflict does not necessarily lead to negative outcomes and can even have a constructive process of change. So, with a conflict, you usually do come up with solutions, and it does not need to always have a negative connotation or negative angle, because it gives you a way, or it gives you a chance to move forward and to find solutions to work uh, to yeah, find solutions to work together better. So this is what conflict means. And the other important question is, what is peace? So I think usually what we get, and as given what when we were presented, what we gave as a definition of peace is also the absence of conflict. So having a very positive relationship with one another and having no arguments or disagreements. But actually, peace in its most basic form is seen as the absence of violent conflict. So not just any conflict, but the absence of violent conflict is referred to as peace. But that's what we all think of in the beginning. But however, it's more than that. It's not just the absence of violent peace. It is also a state of a balanced state that is characterized by values such as social justice, economic opportunity, and environmental sustainability. So when you have situations or circumstances that are based or characterized by these different values, and these are just a few values that we've listed here, but there are more. But when you have different positive values that characterize your circumstance or situation, then you can say that you are in a you're in a state of peace. You can, if you want to read more about it, there are references below. So the previous slide has, and this one also has. So feel free to read up and uh, learn a bit more about it, because it's a very vast and difficult topic to grasp for many of us. So on the left, you can see a diagram. So uh, this is what we refer to different forms of peace. So at the top that you see is is what is visible. So direct violence can lead to a form of negative peace. So that is what is visible to us. So it can be physical abuse, sometimes even mental abuse that can be observed by people around you. So that leads to a form of negative peace. And there are conflicts or situations where the violence is not very visible. So it's more internal. It can be through societal, pressures or cultural, traditional beliefs, cultural practices, and that is a form of invisible. Uh, so then you say there is a form of invisible peace in that situation. So I will not go too much into detail, but yeah, just to give you an overview of what the different terms and different contexts mean. So invisible form is more towards structured or geared towards attitudes and institutions, while the visible is which is something which is more physical and which is easily observable. Yeah. So now we talk about what is violence. So we've just looked at what is conflict, and then we looked at what is peace, and now we are looking at what is violence. So violence actually consists of actions, words, attitudes, structures, or systems that cause physical, psychological, social, or even environmental damage. So it hinders your work, it hinders the way you function, and it maybe, and also in most cases hinders the way you think. So something that hinders your natural processes or your natural abilities is called violence. And direct and it, yeah, exactly, and it prevents people from reaching their full potential, as you can see here. So that direct violence actually involves physical and verbal attacks, and there are other forms of violence as well as the structural and direct violence, which I'll go to in a few minutes. So violence doesn't usually, so physical violence is what causes, we assume to cause more harm because it's what we can directly see. But there are several other different forms of violence that cause, if not more, the same amount or the same level of difficulty or discomfort. So, for example, the first one is the structural violence. So this is more towards the reflects the socio-cultural or the political scenario, and it is a form of it is a form of direct and structural violence. So, for example, there is the Indian caste system, which used to exist, still exists, but no longer, but it's slowly phasing out. But the Indian caste system, where you have different levels of people categorizing people. You have the upper caste and the lower caste, and then you have the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, who are not given the same opportunities or face a lot more discrimination than the upper caste and not given the same opportunity. So that is a form of cultural violence. And you also have patriarchal societies, forced arranged marriages, and genital mutilation, all of which is a form of structural violence. So it is usually directed towards people or even a group of people, and the the cultural angle is what is taken in order to justify the action. So the cultural belief, the cultural practices, the traditional practices that you have been following, that the family or your community has been following, is would be considered as a justification for carrying out such forms of cultural violence. And then you come to structural violence. So this is more based on the institution or the organizational aspect, and also the socio-economic and the political conditions. So it is usually hidden in structures and institutions that are repressive, exploitative, and/or segregative. So this actually involves the use of power. So if there are people in higher positions who use their power to prevent their subordinates or their people who work under them to not reach their full potential, it's a form of structural violence. So you see this in different toxic work cultures and different offices all around the world. And this is a form of structural violence. And this usually prevents the person who's subjected to this kind of violence from reaching their full potential or to achieve their goals, or hinders their development or their growth. For example, especially in the workplace. So this also in a way is connected to the availability of resources and the distribution of power that usually influences this form of violence. And the last one is again what I mentioned before is a direct violence. So it refers to physical abuse or physical harm against other human beings. So it includes killing, sexual assault, violations, torture, beating, verbal humiliation, and all of that. So this is direct violence is rooted in cultural as well as structural violence. So the cultural violence and the structural violence, both of them can have some elements of direct violence involved in it, although not necessarily always, but they do tend to have a form of direct violence involved in it. And usually, direct violence is not something that comes on its own. It comes in through different means. For example, structural violence leading to direct violence, or structural violence leading to direct violence. So it's not something that's done in isolation, but is a result of embedded ideologies or even communities' way of thinking. Yeah. So similar to the peace diagram that you saw, violence also has different forms. So you have the visible violence, which you see in the form of different behaviors. So for example, if you're beating somebody or uh, causing physical harm, that's a form of behavior that you're expressing, and that forms a form of direct violence, which is visible. And then the structural violence and the cultural violence, which is more invisible. So structural violence, as I said, is rooted in institutions and organizations, the way they function, the way they work, and the way they treat their employees, for example. And cultural violence, where it's more geared towards the attitudes and the belief and the practices that you consider important. So that those are all different forms of invisible violence that you cannot usually see. Yeah. So I think since we are all on the same page, I think I now hand it over to Sudha to talk about the partnerships with Peace Nexus and the different aspects of COP16.
Yeah, thank you, Shruti. I think with that background on how this project came to be and what exactly we mean by conflict, peace, and other terms that are commonly used in the space. So, as you can imagine, with all the definitions and meanings that Shruti put forward, these conversations are quite difficult. These topics are quite difficult and often interlinked. So, biodiversity, conservation, environment conservation, nature, peace, and conflict are all issues that a lot of us deal with on a daily basis. And as mentioned, these conversations kept coming up when we spoke to a youth community network and also had consultations. And one of the key first steps that we took in terms of addressing or understanding this issue was launching a consultation. And this was done in partnership with Peace Nexus Foundation. And as you can see, this is the just an image of the consultation of the form that we released. And this was in English, French, and Spanish in order to ensure that we get inputs from a wider community. So this was launched in 2022 prior to COP15. And these inputs and the inputs that our youth community gave by answering a lot of the questions, key important questions is what drove us to take actions at COP15. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, so just to give you a bit of an understanding as to what were the key results that came out of it. On the left, you can see that 90% of the respondents said that a conflict is present in their work. And respondents here referred to our youth community members, so people between the age group of 18 to 35. So they are the ones who responded to our survey, which was in three languages. So, and 90% of them said that the conflict is present in their work. And one more statistic is that 60% of them said that they face direct conflict on a daily basis. So these percentages and these numbers were quite shocking, and it really showed us the gravity of the situation that the young people in our network and communities are going through every day. And out of this 90% of respondents, the impacts that such kind of situations have on them has been listed below. So these are direct quotes or responses that we got from the community members. Around 40%, 39.2% people said that it reduced the frequencies of activity because they felt unsafe. 37% mentioned that they have a fear while carrying out field work because of these conflict issues and situations. Around 26.5% of the respondents said that they have limited opportunities to work or participate. Around 30% said they're able to travel or move or work as a volunteer much less than expected. Then around 23% said that it impacted on how they could speak up about different issues. The safety and the freedom to speak about different issues were hindered. So, as you can see, all these were impacts that young people within our community and over the world are facing, and which is significantly hindering the work that they can do. This made us realize that conflict and the conversations around conflict and its interlinkages to biodiversity conservation as well as environment conservation are key and important topics that we need to address. And we cannot just let them go by because the community feels quite strongly about it. So, the next slide. Yeah. So, again, this is the key results. So, what you looked at in the previous slide was the impact. This was more to understand what our community wanted as next steps. So, as you can see, the first one, our community wanted to understand the linkage between environment, conflict, and peace better. The second is that they wanted a training on conflict analysis and resolution, and indirectly indicating that they wanted some sort of skill building on this topic. Then the third was they wanted peer support groups or spaces for dialogue. So basically, safe spaces for them to discuss and support each other as a community. And the last point was training for security management, because a lot of our members or respondents mentioned that they come in conflict with direct violence, and direct violence is often linked to physical harm. And that's why a lot of them also mentioned they wanted security management. So, as you can see from quite a quite a bit of shocking result in terms of how prevalent conflict is on a day-to-day basis for young people working on in the biodiversity space. So this really helped us map out what our next steps should be, how we should engage our community, and how we can better support members of our community. Next slide. Yeah. So this consultation was then key for us to take into the COP15 space. CBD COP15 in Montreal in 2022. And as Gibbon, we submitted a side event focused on peace, environment, conflict, and youth, but that side event unfortunately was not accepted. So we then made use of other important spaces to to push these dialogues, to have these dialogues, and to really put a limelight on how important and critical an issue it is for our youth community. So as you can see, the first activity that we did was in our youth summit. So our youth summit was held prior to COP15. It was a 2 day youth summit, which saw high-level people attending, such as the UN Secretary General, and a lot of ministers from the Canada Ministry of Canada, as well as Montreal government. Sorry, yeah, Montreal government. So Quebec and Montreal government. So with what we had was a panel discussion, as you can see on the top right. We had an amazing set of panelists come and talk about their issues on ground, what they're facing, the challenges they're facing, and how some of them have managed to overcome these situations. We also had presentations and talks being done on the consultation, the survey, and as well as giving our community youth members, the youth participants, an idea as to what conflict, what peace and environment means, and how they're all interlinked. So this was quite eye-opening. It opened up a safe space for other members to share their experiences as well, and it brought out a lot of pertinent issues and questions to the forefront. Next slide. So the second activity that we had was at the youth pavilion. So we had Gibbon had a youth pavilion that was running throughout the duration of COP15. And one of the key events that we had at the Youth Pavilion was to bring the conversation on environment, peace, and conflict. So as you can see, it was attended by a lot of youth members. And again, here we drove the fact that these conversations need to happen at conferences such as the UNCBD, UNFCCC, and other UN conventions and international agreements, because it is a critical topic not just for youth but even for other organizations and civil society networks. So the next slide. So this was the third key activity that we did around this topic. This was gathering all the national coordinators and chapter members into a formal space or an informal setting, where we had a closed room discussion where Anina from Peace Nexus sort of led a workshop where our national chapters coordinators sat together, identified gaps in their networks and areas where they needed support on this topic. So it helped them map out what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what are the struggles that they face in terms of working in a conflict situation or addressing conflict situations. And just to point out, conflict always does not mean extreme conflict or extreme harmful acts. It can also be subtle, as Shruti mentioned, through uh, through systemic ways or institutional mechanisms. It can always be subtle. So we need to identify ways to have dialogues and conversations in order to not create conflict, but to find ways to resolve small issues and move forward and to move forward with our actions. And it's also important that as Gibbon, we identify ways to act on ground or even in policy spaces without creating an unsafe environment or bringing about conflict situations. So it's not just for our members to tackle conflict situations, but it's also a reflection to look internally and make sure that the actions that we do and carry out does not affect other stakeholders or other important community members who we work with. So these are the three important activities we did at COP15, and it is important to highlight that Gibbon, along with Peace Nexus, we were the only ones. We were sort of like the lone voice within the CBD space, bringing this conversation on peace and conflict and talking about how important it was. Next slide. So what happens after COP16? Again, next slide. So after COP15, what we did was Peace Nexus opened up an opportunity for members of the community to take the online Swiss Peace course on conflict sensitivity. We had an application form launched, that is what you see, and we had a lot of different members from all regions, from the 4 regions of the world represented, and they took this course over 2 months. Next slide. So this course was basically looking at what are the tools and techniques that are available to manage conflict situations and conflict scenarios and how better we can address them. So it was an intensive course which was focused on environmental concepts and bringing these conflict sensitive approaches into environment conservation. After the Swiss Peace Course, a lot of our members who got trained in conflict sensitive analysis then went on to attend a 2 hour dedicated 9 webinars, which was region specific. So we had in Asia, Europe, Africa, LAC regions represented, and all of our task force members took these 9 webinars where they ran, where a consultant, Aline, she a lot because of Peace Nexus support and help, we were able to get a consultant on board called Aline, and she worked with us through 9 dedicated webinars to understand how actor mapping is done. And conflict sensitive lens can be used or applied to anything that we do. So as you can see, this is just a picture of some of the members of the task force of the working group. We have a lot more members who are still an active part of this task force. The outcomes of these 9 webinars was we had a stronger working group member. We were able to build capacity within Gibbon. So these force members would be responsible for supporting other members of the community who are facing critical key challenges and issues. We will have a guidebook coming out before COP16, which is a training manual for people working in biodiversity. So it talks about how actor mapping can be done and how conflict sensitive lens can be used to approach different projects that we do on ground. And then the other document that will come out is a document which lists 3 case studies, one from Cameroon, Madagascar, and Bolivia. So these 3 case studies will help young people navigate or understand how they can use different techniques on conflict sensitivity in their day-to-day lives to carry out projects on ground. So keep a watch for these 2 documents that will come out prior to COP16. Yes, Shruti. Next. The other key event that we had was at the Youth Summit in Yokohama last month. So we were able to do actor mapping in a much simplified manner with all of our participants who will for sure take back these tools into their workspaces and implement them. So this actor mapping tool is something that we are trying to bring into the COP16 space as well, that I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So IYCB was again a huge milestone in this project that we are undertaking with regard to building capacity within our youth members to manage these conflict situations. Next. So looking ahead to COP16, as we go to the next slide, for COP16, what is important to remember is that the theme of COP16 is peace with nature. That in itself draws a huge highlight and focus onto this topic. And this was something that was missing in our last COP. So the theme of this COP is up to us to utilize and make sure that these conversations are brought to the forefront and spoken about in as many sessions, as many panels, and as many negotiating rooms as possible. Next slide. Yeah, so this would be the last slide and an important slide in terms of what we will do at COP16. So we have the task force members have identified areas in the blue zone and the green zone to talk about and bring our messages on peace, conflict, and environment strongly into every space that we're a part of. So something that we did at Youth Summit, we would be following up with some sort of similar activities in the green zone to make sure that the public, the general public, and youth from Colombia are aware that of these tools and techniques that they can use for their work as well. And what we will do at Blue Zone, where negotiations are happening, is to follow up these discussions and negotiations, talk to party members to tell them that this is one of key youth priorities and key youth areas that they have to focus on. And to mention, it's important to mention that at COP16, a lot of our discussions will be focused on the NBSAP implementation and revision. So countries would be reporting about their NBSAP revisions and how they're planning to implement it through the national targets. So one of the key things that Gibbon, the task force, has identified as being important is to bring the conversation of using a conflict sensitive lens or conflict sensitive implementation to all the projects that governments and NGOs will undertake. So it can be a simple step as carrying out actors mapping or applying a conflict sensitive lens to the projects they undertake. And this is sort of the conversation that we're trying to bring into COP16 space. We have a long-term plan of bringing it into other Substar, SBI, and future COPs because Colombia will have the presidency for the next 2 years. So this is one of the key things we will follow in terms of policy. Since there are no textual changes that we can suggest, there are no text changes that are happening, it's important that we give inputs in terms of implementation, indicators, and youth involvement. The other point is that there's a group called ECCP group, which focuses on conflict, and they're trying to bring the conversation of conflict into COP16. And Gibbon, we have partnered with them, and we have helped create this policy document. policy priorities for addressing peace and insecurity during the implementation of the GBF. So as given, we've given strong inputs into this policy document where we highlighted key areas. As I mentioned, one of them is the inclusion of conflict sensitivity into the NPSAP. So similarly, we have given them a lot of key important areas that they need to focus on in terms of making the implementation of GBF uh, sensitive to communities and other stakeholders involved. So for more, I think we can put the link to this priority document to the chat and all of you can take a look at it. But on a last note, we will be opening up this task force working group after COP16 for new members to join in and be a part of it. So keep a lookout for these webinars, these documents and task force members interest forms that we will start from November onwards. Next. Yeah, so thank you so much. I think this is what me and Shruti had to cover and let you know about an important topic that we will be focusing on at COP16. So hope all of you enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you.